Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I want to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to come back to Budapest and meet all of you, and in particular, a good number of friends, old friends among them. It's always a pleasure, and I think it's exactly the right time now to have a public discussion about these topics. If I may say so, the fact that two of my colleagues from the European Parliament, Bas Eickhout from the Netherlands and Philippe Lambert from Belgium, are joining me to actively participate in this conference shows how much emphasis we give the partnership between the democratic progressive forces in Hungary and the European Greens. So I think that this conference will help promoting the causes that you are fighting for. I've been asked to talk about the green growth in Europe, strategies, problems, and opportunities or possibilities. I think it's obvious for anybody who takes even just a short look into the economic pages of any major newspaper that one thing that Europe needs dearly, lacks vastly, is growth. Now you might be surprised to hear that from a Green, because you may have learned at one point in listening to the Greens that Greens have traditionally been very critical of growth. And I still repeat the sentence. The fact that we have at best anemic growth throughout Europe is hindering us to get out of the crisis. There is just no way of shrinking your way into new economic dynamic. Of course, the criticism of the old ways in which growth used to be defined are still valid. And I think these points are by no means anymore just green knowledge, that you can't really sufficiently measure good economic development by pointing out that the GDP has increased in numbers. I think that's almost become common knowledge among progressive actors. So we do need growth to overcome the crisis, but obviously we need a different kind of growth. We can't return to making the old mistakes that were part of the reason why we got into the crisis in the first place. We need a different kind of growth, not the same kind of debt-financed growth that we relied on, not a growth that is focusing that much on the financial sector, ignoring largely the real economy, not a growth that comes at heavy social and environmental cost. Now, the European Union, only 5 years ago, went some steps in the direction of coming up with a strategy for creating such a kind of growth. It was called the EU 2020 strategy. It was a strategy that promised three different major efforts to come up with inclusive growth, which addresses the social dimension, with sustainable growth, which addresses the environmental dimension, and with knowledge-based growth, with smart growth that addresses the innovation dimension of what we should pursue. Unfortunately, if you go from capital to capital, and even in Brussels these days you don't hear a lot about the EU 2020 strategy. And it looks as if the discussion had kind of shrunk back to a very limited agenda, that growth is whatever increases the GDP, and mostly we should focus on reducing energy price and deregulating. And I think it's not even a hope. It's a fantasy. It's a weird fantasy. This is not what will make Europe successful again. So let's talk about how Europe can be economically more successful again. And I'm proud to say that we believe that a concept that we have been advocating for basically the last 5 years could contribute to that turnaround. And that concept is called the Green New Deal. Now, for everybody, that it's obvious that this borrows heavily on the American experience of the early 30s. The New Deal that was President Roosevelt's strategy, and it included 3 basic dimensions. It included a social dimension. The New Deal created social protection schemes nationwide that had not existed before. It included a re-regulation of the financial sector, and it included a new active government role in promoting innovation and industrial activity. And the Green New Deal basically tries to follow on those footsteps, integrating social policy, macroeconomic policy, and industrial policy with 2 notable differences. A, we have to deal with the challenge of the environment and the climate issue. That wasn't an obvious task at the time of President Roosevelt. And we have to deal with that on a transnational level. It's not just a national task. So we talk about a European Green New Deal. And the European Green New Deal is what we offer as an anti-crisis strategy to get out of the crisis and get the European economy moving forward, taking into account social and environmental responsibilities. So as regards the macroeconomic dimension, everybody probably could cite the agenda as easily as I would, reining in the banks, severing the all too intimate relationship between the banks and the public debt, reining in the financial sector, re-regulating the financial sector where it's been allowed to take risks at the expense of society. The social dimension includes measures like protecting social rights, trade union rights, workers' rights, minimum wage, and access to health, and access to good pensions. And then, of course, and that's what I would want to talk about most, the industrial dimension of the Green New Deal. And to put that bluntly, I believe that this is maybe the most difficult, but certainly, hi Andras, but certainly a very decisive dimension of the whole policy. I would put it like that. As an environmentalist, I would argue, if we want to attain our environmental goals, like reining in runaway climate change, we need cooperation with industry. We're not going to deliver the solutions without contributions from industry. On the other hand, if industry wants to have a future, if industry wants to define what would be medium-term and long-term competitiveness, they need us. They need environmental innovation. And I will argue in favor of that. I think it's fortunate that presently throughout Europe there is an increasing attention for industry and industrial policy. just last week, the Parliament voted on a report I wrote for a European industrial policy. That wouldn't have happened maybe 3 years ago. But a couple of reasons make it imperative that we focus on that. A, those countries that have held on to industry have been doing better throughout the crisis than other countries that had entertained the expectation that a modern economy should focus mainly on services and maybe in particular even financial services. Second, there is increasing competition. Traditionally, you would have talked about the industrial countries, and that would have meant the West, the US, Europe, Japan, Australia, Canada. If you talk about industrial countries today, you have to include China, India, Brazil, Indonesia, and many more coming up. So the international situation is changing very fast, and Europe can by no means rest assured that it will always be on the fortunate side if we don't deal with the challenges. And all our international competitors are indeed pursuing industrial policies. The Chinese do, the Americans do, they just call it differently. The Japanese do, the Koreans do. Europe has to do that too. But then what kind of industrial policy? Not going back, as I said before, to the old industries. That's not promising. The low road, the road where you want to depress wages and taxes and social standards to help industry survive, the low road is a road to nowhere. Because without innovation, without technology leadership, you will not be competitive in the medium and long term. You will lose out, not today, but tomorrow morning. But you will lose out. And others are not waiting for Europe to take the lead or to be in the lead. Thomas Friedman from the New York Times once famously wrote, during the first industrial revolution, China was fast asleep. During the second industrial revolution, they started waking up, and they're determined to lead the third. But it's not just the Chinese, it's a couple of others also. And Europe is indeed in danger of losing some technology leadership, even where we're still, as we sit here, as we talk, very proud of our achievements. One of the strong sides of European technology is efficiency technology, energy efficiency, resource efficiency. We're strong there. But if you look at the developments over the last couple of years, others are overtaking us. The investment in those technologies is greater in China, Japan, and the US. The patents, the new patents, are larger in number in those three other regions of the world. So if Europe doesn't move forward, it will lose out. It will be biting the dust of others and not leading the charge. I believe that an industrial policy has to focus on basically three core issues: renewable energy as an energy base, energy efficiency, and resource efficiency. And I find it very deplorable that the European Commission is willing to give up on two of those goals as they try to prescribe the near future of 2030. The numbers that we have, and these are European Commission numbers, indicate that the jobs that can be created through our energy policy would be twice as many if we pursued an ambitious efficiency strategy and an ambitious renewables strategy. And interestingly, the dependency on energy imports from third countries like Russia would decrease considerably if we pursued such a strategy. So the benefits are very real. The benefits are very real, and for the more hard-hit countries in the south, for instance, south of Europe, I don't see another option. Yesterday we heard the Greek Minister for Development in the Industrial Policy Committee in the European Parliament. He said over the last 6 years, industrial production has decreased 35% in Greece, and it's now 9% of GDP. There's no way of creating a good economic development without turning that around. But of course, you can only do that if you invest in the upfront technologies, if you invest in innovation, if you invest in R&D, if you invest in efficiency. So not only from an environmental point of view, of course, efficiency reduces emissions, efficiency reduces the risk of climate change, but also from an economic point of view, getting over the crisis, creating new jobs, creating new business opportunities, greening ideas are extremely important. And when I talk about green growth, I don't talk just about a few sectors. I'm not just talking about the wind energy and the solar PV and building insulation. I talk about all industrial sectors because all industrial sectors can implement a strategy that combines energy and resource efficiency. Yesterday I had a conversation with the new president of Euro Chambers. He's a family, he owns a family business in the brewing industry. And he told me a very interesting story. He said, 20 years ago, someone told me that the cost of wastewater would only be going up. And he told me I should invest in reducing the wastewater. Today, my company does not have any wastewater. If I still had the same level of wastewater, the average cost per year would be 6 million on top of the present cost. That would put me out of business. And I have been dependent on energy from other sources, electricity. I want to create an electricity independent company. And that is my business. So take that as an example. You can also cite the broader German example, where we have allowed a lot of citizens to become a new class of entrepreneurs, investing in new businesses, creating new jobs. In many sectors of our economy, jobs would have been lost or not created if it hadn't been for these green investment policies. And we have even been able to overcome some of the suspicions of our opponents. I recall that when we started the nuclear phase-out, everybody was up in arms because we would make the country dependent on energy imports. Oh gosh, you will have to import nuclear energy from France, the Czech Republic, and so on. Facts are, today the country is exporting more energy than it ever has. And it keeps increasing because the driving and thriving renewables sector is generating much more energy than the declining nuclear sector would have produced. I cite that also because coming here, I heard a very funny rumor, if I shouldn't say ludicrous rumor, someone saying this POX deal was secretly initiated by the Germans because the Germans wanted to import nuclear energy from Hungary, didn't dare saying so, but that's behind the deal that Mr. Orban had with Mr. Putin. Let me tell you, quite frankly, this is utterly ridiculous. If there's any energy deal between Hungary and Germany, it's an offer from us to you that we will be able to sell you energy at a lower price than the Russian nuclear because our wind energy is so effective. So don't fall for that trap. That's nonsense. But it shows that some people are desperate and even resort resort to lies. I think it's, of course, not an easy road ahead because we're bumping into problems. I will mention a couple of problems. Short-termism. Short-termism in economic activity is often induced through financial markets. Last year at the Hanover Industrial Fair, I talked to a lot of SMEs there, asking how much leeway do you have to invest in resource efficiency? And their basic answer was, we have to make that, to get the return on investment within 2 years. Now that's very hard. So short-termism is a problem. Monopolies are a problem. You see that in Hungary with a company, MVM. We saw that in Germany with 4 major utilities trying to block energy transition. We overcame that. Subsidies is a problem. Of course, if the market is rigged by fossil subsidies, it's hard for new technologies to take root. So we discuss very urgently about reducing fossil subsidies to even the marketplace. Then financing is a problem, access to finance. That might even be the most acute problem, because a lot of investors would want to go into these new technologies, but they don't see how. And I think there is a need to use more innovative instruments. We can't rely on the banks alone, because the banks will continue deleveraging. And we're extremely dependent on the banking sector in Europe for industrial finance. In the US, it's 20% banking finance and 80% everything else. In Europe, it's the inverse. That's not healthy. So there are new instruments, and we're discussing that in the European Parliament, but I think that's a very important challenge. And of course, skills. And without the necessary skills, we will never achieve our goals. And indeed, if you look at the most successful German SMEs that are often called the hidden champions, because in a very small niche, they control 30 to 70% of the world market. Most of them rely on the shop floor innovation expertise of workers. So skills and bringing workers into the game is also an important dimension of a Green New Deal. But eco-design, for instance, is an instrument to design products in a way that already sort of foresees the later need to recycle, creating closed-loop strategies. We have a couple of very traditional companies in Germany in sectors that you might not suspect, like the copper sector, that are setting out for themselves the goal to create closed-loop economies in their sector. And procurement, public procurement. 17 out of every 100 euros that we spend in Europe is through public procurement. So that's a tool that we can use, and there are many more. Let me end by saying this agenda is something where we need a real good cooperation with innovators from different backgrounds. We need a cooperation with academics and researchers. We need a cooperation with business people, with trade unionists that think in an innovative way. We need a cooperation with NGOs that warn against risks, and of course politicians and administrators. But I am completely convinced that we have a great future, and we can combine our environmental and climate ambition and our economic and social needs if we pursue a strategy that brings those elements together under the rationale and the logic of a green growth. Thank you.